This podcast is brought to you by Craft Spirits and Distilling for those who make and drink great spirits. Join our free email newsletter for technical and creative distilling stories in your inbox every week. Learn more at spiritsanddistilling.com.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Craft Spirits and Distilling podcast. I am Sydney Jones, and today we are here with my good friend Sienna Jevremov. Did I butcher it, Sienna?
Jevremov, yeah.
Yeah. Sienna has a last name that my tongue just does not want to pronounce at all, but she's my very good friend. Sienna is the head distiller at Widow Jane in Brooklyn, New York. Today we're going to talk a little bit about what her life looks like as the head distiller of a craft distillery that is making kind of huge waves through their blending, their work with alternative heirloom grains, through funky wood. Widow Jane is doing a whole lot of stuff. We interviewed Lisa Wicker earlier on in this podcast, and Sienna is continuing a lot of her work, but also putting her really unique personal spin on it. And I'm so excited to have her on today. But before we get into all of that, G&D Chillers understands that each distillery's chilling requirements are unique. On every distillery project, G&D offers the front-end design and engineering that your team needs at no cost to you. Jim Kerr, VP of Manufacturing at Red Boot Beverages, says G&D has been with us since the early days. Their knowledgeable engineers and service techs are there when we need them. We're in the midst of a large expansion, and they have been there with us to select chiller solutions for today and the future. Reach out for a quote today at gdchillers.com. And for more than 11 years, ABS Commercial has been your full-service equipment manufacturer, designing quality distillation equipment ranging from 50 liters to 5,000 liters. Whether you're establishing a new distillery or expanding into a brew distillery, their team of experienced engineers and designers works with you to develop customized distilling solutions. With their consultative approach, they tailor to your production capacity, space constraints, and budgetary considerations to help you create quality crafted spirits. Contact them today at sales@abs-commercial.com to discuss your customized distilling needs. Hi, Miss Sienna.
Hi.
Hi. Sienna and I got to know each other really well because we were two female head distillers in the Sampson and Surrey portfolio. Sienna and I went to Oaxaca, Mexico together. That was a super fun trip.
Oh, yeah.
And I know her and the rest of the Widow Jane team really well. And I met Lisa when I met Sienna. And there's just been a really great love affair there ever since. So, Sienna, tell the listeners a little bit how long you've been with Widow Jane, kind of how your role has evolved there, maybe a little bit of your background as a distiller before we jump on into the nitty-gritty stuff.
Sure. So I was working with, my history with Widow Jane is pretty long, which is I've been with them essentially since the beginning, which was in 2012. Stop it. Sorry, my dog is scratching at me for attention. 2012. And I initially really just started off right from the very beginning, being kind of at the base. I started off in the weekend in the storefront and just selling the stuff and having to kind of really, no one was there to really tell me how to sell whiskey or really about it. And I had to really educate other people. So I did a lot of my own education. And I kind of fell in love with everything about it, the science side of it, the cultural aspect of it, and all these other really amazing things. And of course, just the product itself. So I knew I wanted to kind of stick around at Widow Jane. And so I started off just kind of selling, doing all the tours, then training the tour people, then doing, admin back of the house. Kind of everyone has to do a little, so you understand this, Sydney, that in craft distilleries, pretty much everyone does everything, always. Everyone's a jack of all trades. And then we put me into the position where I started helping out as distillation. And then when Lisa was brought on, she was going to grow the team and really turn the distillation process into something a little bit more consistent and reliable, and just kind of make a bigger team more productive. And so she knew that I was really into sort of baking and a lot of those things. We had a lot of conversations initially already. So she infamously or famously said these words have always stuck with me, that, a lot of the stuff, the knowledge that you have is stuff that is hard to teach, caring about the conscientiousness, the common sense of it all. And then the rest of that kind of other stuff can be taught. I'll teach you that. So I started training and very quickly kind of moved up as I started training. And then she very nicely then passed along the torch of the blending, which is a whole different beast, which has now kind of been finding my own way through that, which is kind of really interesting. And so it's just been this constant exploration of the unknown, with the help of really great people and the support of some really amazing people at my job. I have an amazing crew. So pretty awesome stuff there. Yeah.
Yeah. And you guys are working out of Brooklyn, correct? At Red Hook is like the neighborhood. I've never been to Brooklyn. So can you describe it a little bit?
What?
I know. Isn't that wild?
Oh, man. Well, I said I would send you some whiskey, but now I'm just going to make you come to me to get it.
Just kidnap me. It's okay. That's totally fine. But in a lot of ways, when I was at Few was considered to be an urban distillery. We weren't in the heart of Chicago. We were in a Chicago kind of suburb, being in Evanston, but we were right on that Chicago line. And, we had a train that ran behind us, and we were dealing with city considerations, and that made kind of distilling in that location really tricky. So I'm here in Kentucky now, and everything almost is geared to distilleries in Bardstown. Like we have a giant plot of land that we're working with, and we have like very laid out truck routes, and we have like very established grain vendors, and like, we have a wastewater treatment plant and things like that. And that's none of what I had in Chicago. We were offloading grain in the street. We'd have truckers like pull up and park in the street, and I'd be driving a forklift in like 5 o'clock traffic. So do you guys deal with any similar things being in Brooklyn?
Yeah, no, it is. It's an interesting thing, as we now are part of. I know initially we were part of this like little craft family. There was you and Few, and then there was Blue Coat out of Philadelphia. So we were this little kind of funky craft crew, each in our own little urban environment. So it was a lot of the same commiserating of, the location, the way the building's set up, the building's falling down on me, all of these things. So it's really interesting now to have people be part of a family that contains big distilleries like Heaven Hill, their Bardstown, and their new location, the building, and all that kind of stuff. And so it's super interesting to have people to kind of finally visit from those places and just see how we do things and the issues that we deal with comparatively. Like, if we spill whiskey, that would be an issue, but it would be, relatively small amount of whiskey that'd be spilling into the street. It wouldn't cause perhaps a river of fire that burned for 100 years and things like that. But, they don't have to deal with the fact that we get 16-wheeler deliveries of 60 to 90 barrels all the time because we don't have the storage space. So when we bring in our stuff, we have to just for each project, we have to bring in our barrels basically when we need them to use, and we have to back that truck down a two-way street, but down the opposite side of the road, backwards down it. And then there's the cranky old lady who hates us yelling at us in the street as we do this. And of course, this is all over cobblestone streets as well. And then, yeah, and, just also, had no place for our stillage to go. So we rely on one company that just has us in a chokehold, really, because we have no ability to really do anything. There's no one else who's going to drive into the city to pick up our stillage. So yeah, definitely an interesting experience being here. It's a lot of people and the people you're going to be making this whiskey for, and stories and color and life. And it's so inspiring to make something that is for all these people you see doing great things, and kind of there's so much art and music and culture and science and things happening to really kind of inspire you. So it's impossible to feel, kind of isolated in your own little distillery world. You're part of this one giant thing. You can go to the bars that are selling the whiskey that you're making down the road, and they can come visit you so easily. And it's all this kind of like, you're part of the the engine that is the city, that's kind of exciting and cool. But it is definitely a pain in the butt kiss. One of the biggest things we're coming up with now is New York City, kind of just after COVID, which obviously caused some issues when it came. We're planning on building some new locations because that would be the kind of obviously the trajectory of growth. But they changed the fire law. That they were kind of doing some more fire coding for buildings because they realized of a lot of these distilleries going up and stuff. And they kind of talked to the New York Distillers Guild. They tried really hard to lobby. I know Lisa was part of that. Derek from Van Brunt Stillhouse was a big proponent of it and things like that. And they talked to us, but for some certain reason, there was this moment where they had all this information. The distilleries had explained everything to them, but then they went away for like a weekend and came back not remembering any of that and completely misunderstanding it. And they all were coming from this like brewing world. So they started making these laws where they were like, okay, we're going to classify distilleries on size. And that size was going to be put on by just generally how much alcoholic volume you have. And so, but not in the considering it in kind of like the proof gallon one, but just in straight up volume. So if you have massive mash tuns, but there's only like 10% ABV, they consider you like a large distillery essentially, which then requires the most obscene levels of sprinklers and fire coding and walls and things like that, which is nice that they're trying to protect, the city doing these measures. But for a craft distillery, a project that had initially been maybe considered, $12 million is now $22 million after all the things that they require. So that's kind of put in a little, it's sort of a classic New York City problem in a way where I don't know if it's true for other American cities, but there's a lot of this, like, they're really encouraging of new businesses for a brief period of time. And then all of a sudden they're like, wait, we're going to put a bunch of laws in it that make it really complicated and impossible. And now we're going to kill the industry, but it wasn't our fault. We promise. We're just, so it's an interesting thing for sure.
That's so interesting about the fire sprinklers, because I know Molly, the other co-host of this podcast, she's distilling out in Portland, Oregon. And a big problem that Portland distillers have is with, I think it has to do with fire and or also earthquake, like safety.
Wow. Yeah.
So they can only build their like ricks up so high, and they have to sprinkler every single rick. Like every single, yeah, I know. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. So they want you to have like, essentially you need like insane sprinkler preventative measures in place, or you have to build a warehouse the size of a football stadium, if not larger. And it's just crazy. Very safety minded, but still, it's just like, do you really need all those sprinklers and the capital that goes into that? Something I've been thinking about so much because I kind of have to with this build out is things like stillage and things like, fire pump house and like utilities that are not like the fun part of building a distillery. But this is like what most of my life is right now, is marking pipes and thinking about fire safety and thinking about stillage. And it's such a big part of what we do. So you have someone who comes and hauls it away, just like the whole thick stillage?
Yeah, so essentially we have these plastic IBC totes that everyone in the beverage world and beyond knows very intimately. So we have that, and the company will come when I call them sometimes.
Sometimes.
When they feel like it. And then they'll come and they will, just I'll pump it in there once it's cool enough to go into plastic ones. And it's just essentially grain. We distill grain on, we're batch distillation. And so, but we collect a lot of tails to make sure we're like really removing as much alcohol as humanly possible off. And then, they come and take the whole thing up, and they take it, and it's to a company that produces animal feed. I'm not sure if they dry it out afterwards or if they do it mostly wet. It goes to Jersey, and I like to stop thinking about it.
That's very fair. That's something
I've reached the threshold of my ability to think that much. I've got other more local things to think about.
Yeah, for sure. we're going to be running a dry house, and it's the first time in my career I've ever worked with a dry house, and I've had the like dumb luxury of not thinking about where my stillage is gone for like the past 8 years, and now I have to really think about where my stillage is going and how to run all this equipment that's attached to a dry house, and it is a lot. It's a lot of technology just for one simple thing, which is drying out grain. But yeah, from a sustainability standpoint, it's so important. Yeah. What other kind of aspects of running, in Brooklyn are tricky? I remember you telling me once that you guys had like one floor drain. Please tell me that's changed.
No. No, it has not changed. Yeah, I think there's a lot of that thing, we're building into buildings that are pre-existing sites. There's not too many empty sites that are the kind of size that you're looking for. And then building from the ground up is not necessarily always considered, it's not always the kind of cheapest option. Sometimes it's nicer to have the kind of skeleton, also just aesthetically. And then also I think I could be misspeaking a little bit, but it could be, you're also kind of grandfathered it in to a lot of like choices that wouldn't be allowed now if you're like in an older building, kind of like aesthetics wise and stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
But so I think that's one of the biggest things is you're in these places that are just not made to have you inside of them. Like they're not. So we're spread out over like 4 or 5 different facilities. Like my mash room is in a completely different address around the corner from where my still and fermenters are. And my fermenters are below my still. We don't have any hardwired in lines, so it's just a lot of like running a lot of hoses and hoping the prime maintains and things like that. That's kind of really an interesting part of that. And then also just, as you said, because another thing that a lot of people find really interesting is about the city is you don't really own buildings here very often. You don't own properties. Unless you're really, that's the thing you do. If you're an investor and a landlord and your family has been doing it for ages, then perhaps you do own a building in the city, and you bought it, years ago. But we're leasing almost everything. So changes are going to be, you're going to really deeply consider how many changes, because you've got landlords you've got to ask their permission to do for, and then also you're investing large sums of money into something that you could potentially not have for prolonged periods of time. So that's an interesting thing to take into consideration. So yes, currently we are operating with very small floor drain situations and like pumping to the gutters, which are like, and the sewers that are like above us when we're in the basement, and all these wonderful things. So yeah, it's a super interesting thing to think about. And I think if one was to ever build a distillery, I think first and foremost, I'd take 5 billion hours making sure that my cement that was going to lead to my drains was laid so correctly. I want no dips under machines. I want floor drains. I want ramps down to them. Like, start there. Those foundations are literally the foundation of a distillery.
Just floor drains as far as the eye can see. That's crazy that you have 5. I had no idea that you guys had 5 different locations that you were negotiating. What is that like from a logistical standpoint? If your mash room is at a different address than your stills?
Yeah, it's a little difficult. It kind of means you have to take in considerations when you're getting equipment and things like that. I like to use pumps that are going to be able to kind of really move the way we need them to, but they also need to be very flexible and easy to move. They need to be easy to clean. The pipes need to be pretty easy to clean too, because you're going to be using a lot of them in a way. A lot of making sure you got remote controls, making sure and then also a lot of like making sure that you have like 50,000 copies of everything, because you have one SOP, but it's an SOP you need in every single location you have. So it's there, and safety, all your safety data sheets and all these kind of things, you need them, like you kind of want them there, making sure that every site that I have has the exact same like copies of equipment. I need like 50,000 chemical handling gloves and things like that over and over again. But yeah, it's a little nerve wracking, because there is a lot of stuff where you kind of have to sometimes like trust the process, and that's like the thing that really kind of gets on me is, when you're moving, there's a lot of like being like, well, I really hope that this is going to transfer down to the other side. If something's not happening, then you have to like run through all of these different things that could have possibly happened out of sight, out of mind that could cause issue, which is very odd and weird. And then, those 5 sites also include the fact that we just have like different warehouses for storing barrels and things like that. So it's a lot of trucking back and forth, which brings up a whole logistical nightmare, and then figuring out how one's going to ship things and all that kind of stuff. And then a communication becomes so important. I think that's the really biggest thing. Like communication, of course, I'm sure is like also one of the really important foundations of a distillery. But I think because we are so spread out over so many different areas that are all interlinked in some way when it comes to the process, it's like we got Slack, and that was a bit of a life changer because we used to have like these obscene group text. So at least now we have obscene Slack channels that are just blinging all the time. But I'm like getting to this point now where I really feel like I need some serious walkie-talkie situations, because you can't always rely on people like looking at their phone. You need to like blare in their ear, be like, listen to me right now. Communication is definitely something that we have to really make sure that it's working well, to kind of make sure that everything flows correctly and people aren't, pumping into areas where the valve is shut or it is open, but someone's there and they're not supposed to be, and all that, like, having solid lockout, tag out programs and all that good stuff.
It sounds very much like this very intricate ballet that you guys are dancing. And it's a really great tie-in to, the fact that if you're planning a distillery or a brewery lunch, or adding a distillery to your brewery, or considering purchasing an existing brewing or distilling business, then you need information, you need planning resources, you need things that are tailored to these businesses education-wise. And you can get that through breweryworkshop.com. And it's specific to breweries and distilleries that are operating together. And it's brought to you by Craft Spirits and Distilling and Craft Beer and Brewing. What do you know? Over 4 days in this course, you learn what it takes to get a successful craft beverage business off the ground, panel discussions, there are working group sessions, technical tours, a whole lot more. And you can get your ticket now at breweryworkshop.com if you are also dealing with a crazy ballet like Sienna is here at Widow Jane. Because that's a lot. I kind of want to ship you walkie-talkies now, just as a...
Thanks. I'll take him.
Yeah. I'm just going to go down to the sporting goods store and buy you walkie-talkies. So switching gears a little here, outside the logistics of running a distillery and a blending house in such a weird location that has 5 different addresses, you're negotiating a lot of different challenges there, but you are functioning both as blender and head distiller, correct?
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
And usually that's a role that we see in some other operations that is separate. They're distinctive roles, and you are kind of doing both at the same time, which sounds like a lot. How do you kind of juggle those two things? Because I think in terms of blending, a lot of people think that blending is just like when you get the final product, but there's a lot of forecasting that goes into blending as well. And now that you're working with your newest product, Baby Jane, which is something that you've been developing for years and you've been forecasting it, how do you kind of navigate the roles of being a distiller and the roles of being a blender, and how do you make them kind of come together?
It's an interesting thing because they definitely are very different, or at least the way we do them, very different modes of thinking in a way. Being the way we distill at Widow Jane, because we are still so scrappy in craft, so it is very manual and physical and kind of doing that kind of thing, getting kind of in it, just getting very dirty and in it. But then, I've for the longest time, for the most of my career, I've been dealing with White Dog as kind of my like flavors and those kind of flavors, and kind of trying to predict the future of what they'll be. So once I took on and so kind of making choices based on kind of what I had tasted or what I imagine or what the science says or what other people have tasted for the barrels and where they're going to be and all that kind of stuff. So when I took on blending, it was super interesting to be like, okay, now this is what I have. So I have to now relearn how these new flavors will work together in a blend, how they will balance and work, and kind of try and look into, for myself, looking back into their history a little bit, so I can sort of plan for my white dog that's going in to kind of be reflective and stuff like that. So it's actually really kind of, I think, a really useful thing for both sides of the coin to kind of have a chance to see each other a little bit. What I know, the weird mixed metaphor that was. But yeah, no, I think it's really advantageous for me in a lot of ways, because I think it's really good and really important to be, since a lot of our blending is a sourced product, it's kind of cool to be tasting other people's whiskeys across states and seeing kind of, you know, a lot of the bourbons we do deal with have similar mash bills but slight variances, and so it's just really kind of exploring like the terroirs. And then, of course, I know where the sources are, so I can kind of look up the distillation styles, and just kind of like, we generally know where they were aged in warehouses and things like that. So it's super interesting. And now that we even have chances to really have much more communicative qualities with the people who we're sourcing from now, as we've grown bigger, which that's really cool. So it's really interesting to be able to now be able to be a bit even more specific in that sense. So that's really cool, because it really informs me in the sense that when I'm doing my distilling, kind of laying down and what will happen to it, and planning for the future in that way. But I also think that it means that I have an appreciation for all ages, all whiskey and that kind of stuff. So like with the Baby Jane, you know, I've been drinking White Dog for so long, and New Make for so long, that we actively chose a little bit to kind of release it at a slightly younger age. I think a lot of people expected us to go for like 10 years or something like that, or maybe even shift it into the make the 10 year just become Baby Jane at one point. But we decided that actually we wanted to release it as a 4 to 6 year old blend. And rather than, we did obviously have 6 year old laid down, but we actively chose to include some 4 year old product in it, because it just was, you know, we felt when we worked on the recipe for that, you know, I communicated a lot with people. I really referenced a lot with people. I feel like being a distiller, I'm always working with a team. I always have people to riff off and jazz with and things like that. So that's really informed the way I blend. I like to have it as like a team thing and a chat and a blending thing. And there's moments where you have to like kind of sit down and really just kind of be within your own world. But it's in the end, I always end up going and sourcing opinions and chatting with people and conversing and things like that. And I think it's really important. And that's kind of, I think, came a little bit from how I was used to working as a distiller on a team. Now I feel like I'm gone on a tangent. I don't even know where I'm going with that. Where was I going with that?
No, that's great. So Baby Jane being, so it's the latest Widow Jane whiskey that it's heirloom corn, correct?
Yeah.
And you guys produced a lot there in Brooklyn, but I know that you also distilled parts of it also in Kentucky on different systems. Yep. And you guys do like very classic batch style distillation, which, you know, the craft industry has really kind of cut its teeth on like that. When I think of craft, I think of batch. I don't think of continuous models like you see with these big Kentucky producers. But, and correct me if I'm wrong, was parts of the Baby Jane distilled on like a continuous column kind of system?
Yeah, so we have a couple of different sources actually across a couple of states for the Baby Jane distillate. But yeah, it's kind of cool because we were able to create our own, you know, we have our craft, which even are still, I think even in the craft world is a bit of a funny one, because we went for the Christian Carlson, like basically brandy still. So I have like a hybrid single pass pot into short column still. So it's like super conjure, like loads of congeners, like very rich, heavy, flavorful whiskey, but also I can get super high proof, which is like in one run, which is kind of like, I think, a little confusing for some people sometimes. Yeah. And then, so yeah, that's kind of our style, very kind of like rugged craft, a little bit because it's this batch distillation, every batch kind of is a little different, even no matter how much you strive for consistency. And so it's kind of nice that we do have also for blending, we ran off these column stills. We worked with Castle and Key, who have their kind of more historic style, but it's still kind of a newer product. That the stills actually themselves, I think, are one of the newer things, but their fermenters are the old historical fermenters. So they're like big open wooden fermenters. So that's super cool. And I think super important and super interesting that we had this like open old school fermentation style as a choice when it came to flavors, and the kind of slight little tours that adds to it, that little extra distinctness from their kind of biome of bacteria and yeast and all that good stuff. And then we also ran at other distilleries who had more of that kind of very, very classic as well. I mean, and when I say classic, I mean like kind of like the past couple of decades of classic Kentucky style stills, these big continuous columns kind of on a large scale kind of stuff. And so it's super cool to see those spirits coming out too, where they have these like big swathes of very like consistent juice, maybe a little lighter, but still pretty rich. So it's, that's kind of the spectrum that we have. And so being able to blend across known distillation techniques has been really interesting, where the mash bill we know is exactly the same. The protocol was exactly the same, but the distillation technique was a little different. The barrels were exactly the same. The warehouses they were aged in were a little different, but pretty similar. So it's really interesting to be able to see kind of an aspect that to blend with a quality that I don't think a lot of people get to blend across, they don't have that insight necessarily all the time, which is kind of really cool.
That's what I think is so interesting when you're producing the same mash bill, same protocols, but you're at two very different sites, because this is something that we're having a lot of conversations about at Heaven Hill, because we're going to be we're going to be making the same whiskey at Springs, but it's going to be different than Bernheim. It's still going to be world class, but it's going to be different than Bernheim because it's a different site. It's a completely different site. And there are some aspects of it that we're kind of tweaking, but I think just from a fermentation standpoint, each distillery kind of has its own unique microbiome of like natural yeast and flora and fauna that's just kind of floating in the air, and it's been developed, and like then you take that whiskey and you make it somewhere else and you don't have that. And the natural environment provides so much flavor that we can't quantitatively like measure, but it's pretty significant. Were you seeing bigger differences than you thought, or were they more similar? Was there like a through note? Because I know you said the Widow Jane distillate is kind of like a beefy, congener, heavy spirit. Was it a big kind of rainbow spectrum of different distillates that you guys were getting back in? And how were you marrying them together before you filled, or were you aging them separately when you guys went?
No, so we kind of kept everything kind of pretty independent, because I think actually we didn't know if they were what the idea initially was. Maybe someone had an idea, but I don't think anyone expressively had initially decided what the intention. We knew that we needed to run larger quantities if we wanted to release it in the way we wanted to, which is not cute little bespoke craft, very expensive bottles of whiskey, but rather something that's really interesting, and we really believed in a lot of the aspects of it. So doing these like larger distillations elsewhere was kind of played a little into that. But I think we were like, maybe we're going to be like, well, maybe we'll keep the New York for just New York, or, let that age up and we'll start releasing the other stuff. So I don't know if that was initially in the idea. So we kind of kept everything separately, but once again, treated everything as very much the same as much as we could, beyond the fact that the sites were different and the systems were different. We used the same starting yeast and things like that, and kept same protocol and things like that. Yeah, I definitely think there is certain flavors that are just very inherent to the yeast choice that we have, the way we generally choose to ferment it when it comes to like temperature and length of fermentation. And then, of course, our specific corn varietal, which this is what the Baby Jane name comes from. It's not just an heirloom corn, but is instead a hybrid between two heirloom corns, which hybrid is kind of a hard word to use because that kind of makes it sound like it's actually more of a GMO, but it's literally just the baby of Wapsie Valley, which I don't know too many people who've distilled from that. But then Bloody Butcher, which is obviously quite popular in the distillation world right now. Quite a few people have tried it out. You can also get it in food and things like that. It's like very classic Appalachian corn, beautiful red corn, a little spicy, but very fruity and just super interesting, just full of these really interesting flavors. And then the Wapsie Valley is very buttery, and I think a lot of the oil comes from it, but that oil kind of expresses in this kind of very creamy way. And so combined, you do get this like fruity, but also very like grassy, oily, but also creamy corn. Like all these things layered in there. So that's like very prominent in all the distillates, but you definitely get this interesting range where you have mine that are very rich, the texture is intense, but also like, the flavors are really there, really present. Some more of the savory notes come through, not just the fruitiness. But then on those bigger distillations, that you're going to get a lot more of this kind of a little bit those same flavors, but they're a little cleaner, a bit more refined, a little bit more succinct. And so each one of those different now column distillations that I now get to try do have their own quality to the way you can kind of see the hand of the distiller, I feel like, almost more than you can see the hand of the site they're at, maybe a little bit. I don't know. It's hard to say, because like there's the ones that definitely the people didn't refuse. We had one where people refused to do the protocol the same way we wanted to. So there's a really weird and grassy and kind of earthy, but fun, but in a different way. But then we have ones that were run on sites that we knew were just very good at producing some very clean, effective, very efficient. And then so the fruit on those is just like mad. It's very sweet, very fruity. And then we have other sites where it's a combination of like the distillation was a little bit more rounded. You get a bit combination of the two things. It's a little bit more rough, but then also they have those open top fermentations. So it's like you're getting this whole nother secondary layer of flavor coming in from that. So it's super interesting. So we kept them separately, but then working with my team when we were developing the recipe, made the active choice to do a blend across quite a few states to include all of those to create a more dynamic bourbon. Not that the distillate itself, each independent place wasn't delicious and unique in their own right, but I think we're a little, maybe we're a little blend crazy. It's one of my favorite things to do. So I think we just love doing it and it's so fun. So I don't know, maybe that's what it is. We're just like, we're a hammer. So we see everything as a nail. We're blenders. So we see everything as a chance to blend. I don't know. Maybe that's what it's become like.
So Baby Jane, it's been out for like 2 months now. This has been a pretty big release for you guys. And I'm assuming that you blended a large batch for this. And by large batch, I mean more than the typical 5-barrel batch that goes into like the flagship Widow Jane bottling.
7 barrels.
Okay, so it was 7 barrels per like bottling run. Okay,
yep.
Gotcha.
Per batch. Yeah, so we like to keep things small. It's for us what it really is we find it better for creating a little bit of individual quality between, I think there's always this like we started off as a single barrel company. And so I think there's always this idea of, obviously when we were doing that, every barrel was like wildly different. So every bottling of that was completely different. There was no need to try to attain like a consistency. And so we've sort of always kept that as a tried and true through all our blending as well. There's no need to there's a consistency, but there's no need to be like every bottle, we have the luxury. We don't have to be like Heaven Hill where like every bottle of that specific Elijah Craig really should trace like another bottle of Elijah Craig unless it says it's not or it's different and things like that. We luckily have the ability to be like, okay, 10 years is going to taste like 10 year, yes, but each batch and each year is going to be ever so slightly different, a little bit more nuanced, and that's kind of the fun of it. That's why you should keep drinking it, keep going back to these little fun changes as it goes along. And so where was I going with that? Now I don't even remember. What was
I think it's cool. You're giving yourself kind of like the individuality of a single barrel with these tiny, tiny batches, but you're giving yourself more colors in your coloring box, your Crayola box to play with and to blend with.
Yeah. It's also a little bit of a more logistic thing to talk a bit more shoppy about it, where we really like to keep it. And this is, I guess, kind of something I push for too. I really like the way we blend and the way we do things to really be easy and accessible and workable for production, and how that's going to function and how the bottling is going to go and stuff like that. So we like to blend where our batch sizes will be kind of like enough for a tote. So it's enough to go. One person can work on it. One person can do that. And then that one tote then ends up being that, that batch kind of thing and that bottling run. Something about that kind of keeps this sort of a little bit more grounded in reality. And it sort of stops us from becoming this thing where we're just like spreadsheets and, I don't know, something about it just like, I prefer it. Maybe it's the craft startup with me, but I just like the idea of it all being kind of something that's a little bit more reflective all the way through the process.
It keeps the magic there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It keeps it witchcraft. How we like our whiskey. We like our whiskey witchcraft.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of like blood, bones, crystals involved as well. Small seances. We all wear black robes. So
now I really want a t-shirt that says, I like my witchcraft like I like my whiskey. The same.
Yeah.
If anyone out there has a Cricut and can send me that shirt, I'll send you a bottle of booze. God, that would be amazing.
Perfect. There we go.
Exactly. 2 shirts, one for Sienna, one for me.
Yes.
So with having this like really human element to your blending team, you do it as a group. You do it kind of based on it sounds like personal palettes play quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And do you find that there is still like a house style that is being developed for each of these expressions of Widow Jane, despite it being like a very individual, personal blending approach?
Yeah. So essentially kind of, we actively created a system that would be possible. So we have 3 blenders and then we have 1 independent checker. And so we have our 3 blenders, which we will often try to blend together, but not necessarily is that always something that's possibly able to do, especially as we grow. But as we've matured as blenders, that's fine as well. And so we are always constantly testing and tasting the product beforehand, and we always keep this idea in head. And we're like, if we ever feel like we're having a hard time struggling deciding if it's just a whiskey we like or it's a whiskey that belongs within the tenure program, we always know that we can taste it with each other and chat about that and kind of explore that. So yeah, each product definitely has these goals in which we're looking for. And then we luckily then have a kind of outside party that checks it and essentially is a bit more of like, yes, no, this, and really is more like a pass fail on the fact that like if it belongs within the scheme, because he gets to try, we maybe blend 4 at a time as it goes, but they get to just try a swathe of them, and they're trying kind of the final stuff rather than all the reworks and all the ones that don't work and things like that. And so that's a great kind of aspect that allows for consistency to maintain, and for there to be the tenure to still be reliable while also having this like individual nuances and touches to the products as well. And we also track whoever blends what blends. So I secretly, whenever I go to tastings, I always check to see whose bottle I'm pouring and things like that, which is always fun. And kind of cute. But yeah, there's definitely also sometimes I think, oh, this one tastes like me, and then I'll be like, oh wait, it wasn't me. Oh, okay. So there's always that too. So yeah, I think we've gotten pretty harmonious. We've all, conjoined to become one truffle of We're just becoming the same person at this point, basically. I mean, I am slowly starting to dress like Jacob, and then I'm starting to dress like Michelle, and we'll just all be one. We'll be one person at the same one point.
One big conjoined triplet. Just a really, okay, yeah. I'm just picturing it in my head.
We'll kind of do like we'll do a bit. It will be sort of like I'm kind of imagining it being like the kids sitting on each other's shoulders wearing a trench coat, kind of like all three of us are a bunch of kids pretending to be one single blender.
See, that's way less macabre and much more realistic than the creature that I was picturing in my head of just. Like,
I know. I can see you going a little bit like human centipede kind of quality.
It was real weird. Thank you, horror movies, for giving me that image.
Yeah, I was trying to make sure you weren't going to have a nightmare. Just imagine us all as like a bunch of kids standing on each other's shoulders trying to sneak into a movie.
I like it. Yeah, exactly. Now, this model that you kind of have developed over time with your set products, because I know you guys do quite a bit of like the Widow 10 and the Vaults and Decadence and now Baby Jane, with some of your more like esoteric experimental things like the applewood, which is the only applewood whiskey that I have had. Do you apply a similar approach to when you're doing something from a research and development perspective, or you're working with kind of a hero ingredient that is really different or unique, whether it is a grain or whether it is a type of wood or whether it is the batch size or whatever else? Is that kind of a similar model that you follow, or do you kind of branch out from there if you're working with something weird or different?
It's one of those things where, that one always becomes something where the recipe is a little bit more fluid. So we have certain ones where there's a little bit more of consistency with the products we're using, and we have a little bit more reliability, and so those usually are our big flagship ones. We of course then did make things a little bit more complicated for ourselves with the applewood, where the applewood can really be a hard one to play with. But on that front, we've now, so I'm sorry, I'm like making this very vague. So with the applewood product, so what it is just for the listeners who don't know, the applewood is a whiskey that we do, which is a couple of sources of different rye, some sourced, some actually distilled in-house by myself, and also some distilled in Kentucky by us, kind of a similar thing. We're doing that kind of like kitchen takeover, distillation takeover with our rye as well. So the applewood is a blend of these whiskeys where we were also adding the addition of applewood staves to the barrel for about 3 to 6 months of aging at the end. And this will express in many different ways. They're not charred. So they're honeycombed, which allows for that extra surface area without that extra charring, and they're just kind of a nice medium toast. And so you get flavors anywhere from kind of floral, like apple blossomy, that can also almost veer into like soapy. But you also can get some really fun extra juiciness, but also some of this like intriguing woodiness that's a little bit more kind of musty, but in kind of a almost sort of like vermouthy fortified wine kind of way, which is interesting. So a lot of people, like the applewood almost has got this quality where it feels like it is a cocktail without even really having the cocktail elements in there yet. And so with that product though, it's a constant product of ours, but we were doing the staging program when we were getting to this place where we were just needing to make so much of the applewood that we were not having the chance to let it rest for the same consistent amount of time. And so this was kind of creating issues because we were working with like applewood that was expressing very differently at different points. So if anyone knows that like wood really has those sort of sine waves of expressions and how it sits in the barrel and things like that. And so we decided that we needed to build in and kind of develop a way where we could really let as we were doing this, though, we were learning and taking notes and really learning the way that it expressed different points and how we liked it and what worked better. And one of those things was we did like how we liked having 2 ages because that actually kind of worked two lengths of applewood staving because we felt that it was kind of fun to have like a little bit of a dynamics. But we also did feel that it just allowed us to plan better, because we decided that overall that we prefer this staving for a certain longer period of time. So this was sort of an encouragement to basically preemptively bolster up our applewood staving program earlier, to make our blending lives easier and to bring a bit more of consistency into the product and just kind of make that. So it was sort of, that was a sort of a cyclical thing where we allow ourselves to kind of do, as the product develops, that kind of then affects the product, then like the blending part of it affects how we then do the processing and the original, go back to the drawing board a little bit. Something that's a little bit more fun and free form, but also because of it so scary, because we don't have any real reference when we're doing it, is when we do our vaults program. So those are finishes using some really interesting woods, and it's a singular program. And so not only are we taking like 15 to 20-year-old whiskey, so some really beautifully aged whiskeys and blending across those, but then we're doing like a finishing component. And every time it's a new wood, every release I have to come up with a new wood I want to do. And so that's really daunting, because it's a lot of trusting the process there and then blending with what you've got, and like not really having a crazy amount of time to test and go through that. So that's super interesting. And I learned kind of how to do the blending from Lisa with that one, which is a lot of do it gradually and slowly. It's like adding salt to your dish, just like do it to taste, keep doing it as you go along, let it rest, let it sort of remember that the blend will still develop as it sits, as it aerates and oxidizes and things like that, and mellows, with the water and all these other things. That's a scary one. Yeah. We're just going to be releasing. I don't know why I decided the second vaults I was going to do, which the first vaults was like one of the first projects we'd released under me as the new head blender. So that was Chickapin Oak, and that was a bit of a kind of honoring Lisa a little bit, because I know that we'd always discussed doing Chickapin Oak. So that was like definitely trying to do something that would honor her and her memory with the vaults program and what she developed. And so I trusted it, and I also really heavily relied on my blending team, and we worked together really tightly on that so that we could make it a solid thing. This time around, I felt apparently very competent, and also maybe to the point of foolhardiness. I decided, why not challenge myself with one of the most rambunctious, intense woods on the market, that is very contentious, which is amburana. And then on top of that, I know, I could see it in your face.
No, because I love amburana, and I worked with amburana at Few on a still yet to be released product that will hopefully hit shelves in 25. And it's funny. Oh, cool. Because you see it's like it popped up everywhere overnight. I go out and I see like 10 different amburana finishes, and I had been working with it for years at this point. I'm like, I did it first, but no one knows it because I'm petty like that and intrusive thoughts. I didn't actually do it first.
I was just coming out this year, October.
Yeah, you beat me. It is. It's a punchy wood. It is punchy as hell.
Yeah. So I essentially was like, I want to challenge myself to blend with it in a way that hopefully is appreciated. I decided that was what I wanted to do. I not only wanted to do a wood that was really, really popular right now, also do a product. And then I also decided I kind of wanted to essentially do a lot of the blending of the vaults by myself too. So I had existential crises. But I did a lot. That's initially how it started, but it was really a lot of it. I went back to teamwork. I'm all about teamwork. I've never not been a team worker. That's why I went into film production initially when I was studying. I was like, I want to just do cool things with a group of people. Together we'll make beautiful things. And so I think, that's exactly how I approach blending. I want to always do it with people and chat with it and talk about it. And the funnest thing is talking over bad choices and good choices I've made and missteps and errors, but also kind of how I've remedied that and seeing that kind of evolution. But yeah, the vaults is always scary because I don't really have much time to I can do bottle tests on staves and stuff a little bit, but I have to also make sure that those are something I can then actually get barrels of, and then who knows what those barrels are really going to express like, and if the juice is actually going to taste like what you think it is, and then if it's what it's going to taste like with the juice that you want to marry it with. And we have to do that every year, something new. So that one's a scary one.
Well, and especially with these highly extractive woods like amburana, which just can get very overpowering very quickly. And you're also working with very, very old whiskey that already has a lot of character to it. That's a really hard balance to strike. And I have literally no doubt that you did it. But was there, because I believe in you so much and I adore you, did you have an approach when you were tasting these things? And did you have a product in mind? Because there's a lot of data on amburana now, and we know how it tastes. It's not like one of these weirder woods like applewood, which is a little bit more esoteric, you know?
So I understood what I was going to essentially do, and I did do some stave program, like order some amburana staves, get them in some bottles and stuff to initially start getting a feel for it. But yeah, it's just one of those things too, where you just, because I wanted to do something different, and because I knew that the whiskeys I had were going to be so interesting and weird, I don't know. And it's one of those things too, where I wanted to really I was hoping, I don't know if I've achieved it, but I was hoping to do something a little bit, take something that's so commonly known for this very specific flavor notes and see if I could find a way to utilize them in a different manner, to kind of use them, the same color, but use them in a different way by combining them with some other different flavors. It's difficult, but yeah. And so, yeah, but I guess maybe I've been kind of cutting my teeth on weird woods like applewood, where there's no real proper knowledge. I think, maybe I did go for amburana because I also knew what to expect. There was a lot of other woods I was looking at, like different weird oaks, like Carpathian oak and things like that, and like Greek oak. And I was like, that sounds great, but also I have no idea what that's going to taste like. I don't know if this is the one, but maybe next time. Maybe that's the next challenge. I'm going to go back to the weird woods that no one knows about.
Well, that's the fun
I'll
part.
go forage my woods.
There's so many. There's literally so many out there. And that's, I think, one of the cool things about craft operations like Widow and craft producers like yourself, where there's so many opportunities for creativity for you, and you're only getting it's only getting better as you go. You're developing such cool things, and you're creating, I think, in my mind, the house style and legacy of Widow Jane is that it's always unique. It's a familiar experience every time, but the experience is also, it's new. You bring something different to the table every single time. And I think that's one of the things that makes you and your team so special. And also part of what made Lisa's contribution to that so incredible as well.
I don't think we would be who we are without Lisa, because Lisa brought not only years of knowledge and just being whip smart in her own right, but also just all the hard work and knowledge she'd gained over her life, working, whether it would be working in the whiskey world or the wine world or even, ballet and things like that. So she brought all this knowledge, so she was very sure and certain and had that kind of place to start. But on top of that, she was always really excited about trying new things, and she kind of encouraged that. There was never her saying, let's be safe. And so I think maybe she's sort of like, as I said before, maybe full-heartedly installed that in us. And so we feel that way very much, where we all feel like, okay, we trust the things that she taught us. We trust that the whiskey, as long as we have that backing confidence and knowledge, there is room to still be fun and interesting in the world. And the whiskey world also, she showed us that the whiskey world will still be receptive to that. They're not always going to, and she's kind of still trailblazing that and stuff, and she's still talking that way. She's always been an amazing communicator, whether it be communicating and advocating for, more homogenous community, women in whiskey and, craft in whiskey, and all these kind of things, like bringing two weird combative sides together. She's always like, she loves to see that and work with that, and wants the world to just be great and harmonious. And so she's also kind of doing that with whiskey. She's saying, yes, we all love whiskey as it was. Like, that's what I cut my teeth on. I still live in Kentucky, and I always will. And I always love the places the great whiskeys that I've always drunk before and how they used to be. But also there's totally room for all these weird, funky craft distilleries doing all their weird, crafty things with corn and weird woods and stuff. So shout out to Lisa.
Shout out to Lisa. And also, like, that's kind of like the best note to close on, this legacy that you guys have built. And you're at the forefront of it now. And I'm so, so proud of you. But before we sign off here, for more than 30 years, G&D Chillers has had the proven solution for distilleries. Visit them today at gdchillers.com. Whether you're establishing a new distillery or expanding into a brewstillery, ABS Commercial is your full-service equipment manufacturer for equipment ranging from 50 liters to 5,000 liters. Visit breweryworkshop.com to secure your ticket to this September's Brewery and Distillery Workshop. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, go to spiritsandistilling.com and sign up for our free newsletter featuring new stories every single week from some of the best writers and distillers in the distilling world. Miss Sienna, thank you so much for being on my podcast. I love talking to you. You teach me things every single time we talk. And I love that we're still part of the same like corporate family. If people want to learn more about Widow Jane or taste for themselves some of these things like the Vaults or Baby Jane or the Applewood Rye, if you want to know what Applewood tastes like, how can they dig a bit deeper? What resources can they check out on the internet?
Sure. So we have an Instagram, which is, I believe, just at Widow Jane, which is great. We are a little bit too cool for school, so our Instagram is informative but also mysterious, but very visual and very stunning. We have a great website too that's constantly evolving, and we're trying to make it more and more informative. But also we're very, very much about you coming and seeing us. We love to host people, so I don't think it's the most crazy thing to expect people to want to come to New York City, but please make a schlep over to Red Hook. We have a pretty great ferry now. Come visit us and you will try things you've probably never tried before on the market, but also you'll get to really talk to the people who make the stuff by hands and feel the passion and stuff, and so you'll be able to really get a great explanation. We do great tours on the weekends. We also can book private tours. We have, if you're within the industry, you can arrange industry tours with us during weekdays. And then we also have Botanica at Widow Jane, which is our bar currently, that serves some amazing cocktails, but also does some really cool tasting flights and things like that. But yeah, we're with Southern Wine and Glaciers, so we're in pretty much every state, and we're in, I think, 39 countries or something crazy like that.
Hey.
We'll be at some whiskey shows this year. We'll be at Whiskey X I know for a fact because I'll be there. I'll be at the Whiskey X's in San Francisco and LA. But we are also going to be at Food and Wine in New York. We normally do NOLA Bourbon Fest and a bunch of other ones. So that's a great way if you want to come visit a booth at one of those whiskey ones. It's a great way to kind of try us amongst a bunch of other ones and chit chat that way. But yeah.
Sweet. Sick. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for listening to episode number 13 of the Craft Spirits and Distilling podcast. We will be back in 2 weeks with another in-depth distilling conversation for you. Thank you so much for joining us. Cheers.
Bye.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Spirits and Distilling for those who love to make and drink great spirits. Join our free newsletter today at spiritsandistilling.com for pragmatic, technical, and creative distilling stories in your inbox every week. Sign up now at spiritsandistilling.com or click on the link in the show notes.